Hello and welcome to This is Cannabis from XRAY FM, the show that takes an insider look at the Oregon cannabis scene. I'm your host, Lee Henderson, and sadly, my co-host Emma Chasen is off this week, but fear not, for we have a great show despite Emma's absence, because my guest today is one of my favorite people in the world, Laurie Wolf. Laurie is the founder of Laurie and Mary Jane, a top-shelf, full-spectrum edibles company located right here in Portland. In addition to her best-in-class company, she is an award-winning chef and the author of 4 best-selling cannabis cookbooks. Leafly, the largest cannabis website in the world, has called her brownie recipe, quote, the absolute best cannabis brownie recipe of all time. And she was titled the Martha Stewart of Edibles by no less a cultural authority than the New Yorker magazine. Laurie Wolf, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while.
I know.
It's been a very busy time.
It has.
What's going on?
Well, things are good. Things are good with the business.
Yep.
We just released 4 cookies, and I mean, not literally 4 cookies,
Right.
4 different types of cookies.
Yes.
It would be easy if it had just been 4
Just been
cookies.
4, yeah. And you're like, that's it, I'm good for the
Yeah,
quarter.
we're good. We have a control study. They check 4, and we're good to go.
Yeah.
But no, it's we're growing, and we have good people, and things are good. I'm like famous for saying, "Oh my God, this is a dreadful business."
Right. We're
and-
going to get to that for
yeah,
sure.
but things are fine.
Okay, good. Right off the bat, we should stipulate that Laurie and I have known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
You were one of the first people I met in the business. And we've been friends for kind of since we met.
Absolutely.
We've had dinner together many times at our respective houses.
Yes, we
with our
have.
families.
Yeah.
Interesting sort of just like note, you have become very close with my mother-in-law.
I have.
Which is
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Shout out to my mother-in-law, Kathy.
Oh, she's wonderful.
She is. I'm
Yeah.
sure she'll listen to this because
Oh,
she
I
knows.
hope
I'm sure
so.
she's going to listen to this.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and you guys have like vacationed together.
We have.
and it's like a family affair now.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. We went to Tahoe and stayed with them for a few days.
Yeah.
And Kathy and Charlie were amazing. We had a blast.
Fantastic.
So,
Yeah,
they're just great.
They are. My first question is like I do know you, and you've had a really, really interesting and extensive career. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about it, about yourself and about it.
Sure. I grew up in the Bronx, New York, and I had, a pretty traditional younger life and smoked some pot starting when I was 15. But I went through college. I went to NYU, and then I went to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park. And after that, I lived in New York, and I worked in restaurants in the city. And I met my husband and became a food stylist. He was a photographer.
Right.
He is a
He is
photographer.
a photographer, yeah.
Yeah.
Your husband Bruce, so you're a little bit older than me, and you were in New York, like this is like the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in 70s and 80s, and I imagine Bruce. I've always thought about Bruce as like the cool hippie commercial photographer guy in advertising for Mad Men. Like the TV show Mad. Like that's how I imagined him back then.
Oh, funny. And when we watched Mad Men, it was hard for him to watch because he remembered.
Right,
like,
that was like his literal experience.
Yeah, like with the ad agencies, it was pretty horrifying. And
Right.
he, you got to take it. When you're offered a job, you got to take it.
Right.
But the culture at that time was really a disaster.
Right. It's so much better now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh God.
So sorry. Yeah. So your husband Bruce is a commercial photographer in New York City, working in advertising.
Yeah, and he talked to me about food styling. I didn't know it. I didn't even know it existed,
Right.
even though I had gone to the Culinary Institute for a 2-year program. That wasn't something that they talked about as an option for people who are chefs.
Right.
But after Bruce, talked to me about it, it sounded like fun. I apprenticed for a year with a very well-known food stylist, and then I became a food stylist, and I did that for...
So what does that mean for our listeners that may not know?
That means that you're preparing food to be photographed.
Yeah.
And that's different than preparing food to be eaten.
To be eaten.
I was never of the school that painted a chicken, with corn syrup or whatever to make it look luscious. I prefer to make it look luscious without doing the weird
Right.
stuff. But, as you see, every ad for food, every company, has a food stylist who makes the food look as good as it possibly can.
Of course.
So I did that for a bunch of years. And while I was doing that, some of the magazines that I worked for approached me to start writing recipes.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that in addition to being a food stylist. And I loved food styling, and I was offered a couple of cookbooks to do back then. And I loved that. It was fun to work with Bruce. I would make the food, he would shoot it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to do that, but I kind of wanted to get into the writing more and doing recipe development, which I completely love.
Yeah, we're going to talk all about that, but yeah.
Cool. And I worked for a parenting magazine for like 19 years, which was perfect. My kids were little.
Right.
And I worked at home. I developed recipes for the magazine, and it kind of became my favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when we moved out here, I was at Child Magazine, a parenting magazine. When we moved out to Oregon, coincidentally, and it seemed unfortunate at the time, Child closed. Like so many of the magazines, publishing has changed radically.
Totally, yeah.
And so when I got here, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then a publisher contacted me, and I did a book called The Portland, Oregon Chef's Table.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed about 75 chefs. I got a recipe from everyone. We shot the food, and I got to know a ton of people in the food community, which was, I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not had that opportunity.
That was your angle. Not just angled sounds. All right.
Entree.
Benign. I hope that's benign. Yeah.
Entree into, no pun intended, into the food community. And I did not really, it never had registered that when we moved to Oregon, there was going to be medical cannabis.
Yeah.
I think I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I moved here, I have a seizure disorder.
Mm-hmm.
I have a form of epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at a dinner party, and I met this guy. I was sitting next to this guy, and we were talking, and he told me that he had gotten his medical marijuana card for his seizure disorder, which sounded like exactly what I had. Not not any of the falling down, foaming at the mouth.
Yeah, put a wooden
horrible.
spoon in your teeth,
Exactly.
spoon in your teeth kind of thing. Yeah.
I had absence episodes where I just didn't know where I was, and it was scary. But and he said, get your card. This has changed my life.
Right. Do you know if it's a neurological thing or
it's a neurological
as
thing.
opposed to being blood pressure related or something?
No, it's
got it.
Yeah, it's epilepsy, and it's definitely a neurological issue. And so I got my card, and I started going around to dispensaries. And I started using cannabis when I was 15. I just used it for fun.
Right.
I talked with my doctor, and I very slowly weaned myself off the medicine that I had been taking for my epilepsy.
The prescription meds.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
This is about 2012, 13?
a little early. I've been here 10 years.
Okay, so 2009.
Yeah.
Okay.
And while I was in this process of trying to manage my seizures, I met this guy, Dr. Phil.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a gas station in Portland, and I sat next to this guy, and he's like, "Oh, lovely to meet you." He was kind of a Albert Einstein-y, mad professor-looking guy. And I was talking to him, he said, "I'm Dr. Phil, but not that Dr. Phil. I'm the marijuana Dr. Phil."
Mm-hmm.
I was like, "Oh, my goodness, this is wonderful." And he talked to me. I told him that I had this seizure disorder, and I told him what my medication was, and he said, "It's poison.
Right.
You are taking the worst medicine. You got to go off it. Use cannabis, and I guarantee you will be able to get rid of this medicine."
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with my doctor, and it took about 3 weeks to wean myself off the medicine
Sure.
completely. And all the time I was taking a little bit of cannabis every day. And really a little bit. It could have been 2 puffs.
Mm-hmm.
It was really... And I stopped having episodes.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
I stopped. I would have auras before I had a seizure, and that stopped. And within 3 weeks, I was just using cannabis and have had, this is about 7 years ago. The only time I've had an aura was when I had pneumonia a couple of years ago, and I had pneumonia once, and I still used cannabis. But I got it again a few months later, and it was worse, and I felt horrible. And I really didn't eat or drink anything, and I wasn't going to smoke.
Yeah, I couldn't smoke, respiratory, yada yada.
Yeah. So I wasn't doing anything, and like 7 days into not using cannabis, I started to have an aura. So it proved to me that the cannabis was managing my issue.
Right.
And kind of made me a true believer because, I wasn't sure. It certainly would have been quite a coincidence if my seizures had
magically stopped.
Yeah.
Right.
But this showed me, and I can use, it only requires the tiniest bit. I mean, I use a lot of cannabis, but if I decided not to want to get high anymore, I mean, it's really like a puff or two or a little piece of an edible.
You didn't really have that choice.
Yeah. So that's been a life changer because when I would have an aura, I would not be able to drive for a bunch of months until I was completely seizure free. It totally was a mess for my
your day-to-day life.
Exactly.
Totally, man.
And the medicine really affected me. It was awful. So being able to make this change has been, and it made me have a lot more respect for this plant.
Right.
I've always loved cannabis for fun, but this is a medicine for me.
Right.
And it's a medicine that has changed my life.
And many people,
Yeah. I'm blown away constantly. When I talk to people who've used cannabis. I have a friend who had an eye disorder. She couldn't see, her eyes was bouncing. Everything she looked at was bouncing and horrible. And she rubs CBD and a mix, a 1-to-1 on her temples and her eyes, she can see
focus or whatever. Yeah.
And people who have surgery and maybe in the hospital they have to do what is given to them, in their IVs, but have managed serious pain with cannabis. And I know so many people who were addicted to opioids and they were able to transition to cannabis. So I'm a true believer.
Right on.
Yeah.
And so you sort of then started taking, some steps towards joining the cannabis industry, right? And sort of combining your sort of, your love of and talent for food and your, appreciation for newfound even, or deepened appreciation for weed, and started this company, Laurie and Mary Jane.
Yeah. When I started going around to dispensaries, I was trying a lot of the edibles, and mostly they were horrible.
They were garbage.
Oh, my God. It was like someone took a bud of cannabis, dipped it in chocolate, and called it an edible.
Right, and put it in a piece of plastic.
Yeah. Or people would say, oh, my grandmother makes these, every Friday, and they're Rice Krispie treats, but everything tasted just so weedy. And some people like that weedy taste, but I don't want that weedy taste. I want to eat something delicious that will, get me high.
Right.
So I came home one day. I was at a dispensary. I bought a couple of things. I brought them home, and I tasted, and I was like, these are really just horrible. And I said to my husband, Bruce, I think I'm going to go into the edible business because there really isn't anything very good. And I have, I've been a baker. So I was like, let's
you're like, I know this.
do it.
I know how to do this.
Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't as easy as I thought because it's hard to disguise the taste of cannabis. It's very strong. The flavor is very strong. So that was the thing that I had to learn. Since I knew how to develop a recipe,
Right.
I think that the extra piece in making edibles is knowing when to cover the taste of cannabis or to allow it to shine
Right.
through.
Sort of
there
like
are some things
maybe
that
not accentuate
benefit.
it, but like give it its own like
Yes,
what
little
do they call that, pen spot? You know what I mean? Like
yeah. And there are some foods like mushrooms when there's a little hint of cannabis. It's another layer of complexity and interesting. It tastes good in that, and also cannabis like with white chocolate. I found great combination. Not no overpowering cannabis taste, but enough. And I guess it's a terpene thing.
right. Right.
It's the strain and what they're and terpenes. I don't know if people know, but those are the compounds that inform the flavor and
And the
the
effect
smell
too.
and
Yeah.
the effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can see when I'm cooking something that has a strong amount or like a lot of myrcene, which is will give you a relaxing effect, but it also has some flavor components that I can work with when I'm developing
Interesting.
a recipe.
Yeah.
So I like to work with a strain that is going to complement that has the kind of terpenes that will work with the kind of food that I'm preparing.
I wish Emma was here to kind of jam with you on the different the ways that different terpene flavors would work with food. That would be fun, but she's not here. Sadly,
I would love to talk with her.
Yeah, that's interesting. So okay, so let's say I want to ask you more about sort of the recipes part of it, the writing that you've done, and the work that you do generally, obviously. So like your recipes have appeared in cannabis publications such as the Cannabis, Dope Magazine, Oregon Leaf, High Times, as well as other sort of just like traditional media outlets like the Oregonian and the San Francisco Chronicle. Additionally, you've written for cannabis cookbooks since 2015. And I wanted to sort of give a quick rundown for our listeners, like a handful of the infused recipes that you've published, so they can sort of get a sense of what we're talking about here. And bear in mind, you guys, this is all cannabis food: steel cut oatmeal, granola bars, mac and cheese, vegetable tart, peanut butter quick bread, white sweet potato soup, peanut butter and almond milk smoothies, stuffed French toast, skirt steak salad, lemongrass chicken skewers, and then my favorite, of course, was the one that was just titled "A Weed-Infused Cream of Celery Soup That Will Change Your Mind on Celery."
Yeah.
And the celery was in italics, so I thought was, and I've obviously like had a number of,
Right.
Not only of your products, but like I've eaten at your house,
Yeah.
So like I'm wondering if you can sort of talk more about that R&D process, and what advice you might have had for sort of aspiring amateur cannabis chefs. So that's a two-part question. So the first one's like, what's the R&D process like? And then like, and I know we talked about this with Andy Bixel early on in the run of this show about edibles, and sort of like I forget there's a word for it, but like how do you make them consistent? You know what I mean?
Homogeneity.
Or whatever that standardization of dosage is, because you don't want to buy a package of brownies, let's say, and then one has all the weed in it, right? And then the other four or whatever are just brownies, right? So how does that work? Tell me more about the R&D process there, especially for, and what makes you so unique is like, again, you're making vegetable tarts and peanut butter quick bread, not, you make brownies and cookies too,
Right.
but you know what I mean? Like it's not, you're way, you're a level above as far as the food goes by and large.
I think that there are a couple of challenges when cooking with edibles. I have an advantage, and everybody who lives in a state where cannabis is legal, whether it's medical or recreational, the cannabis that you're going to get is going to be tested. It's going to be tested for pesticides and maybe what the terpenes are in the strain. But most importantly, you're going to know what the potency is.
Right.
So when I want to develop a recipe, let's say the vegetable tart,
Mm-hmm.
I will think about what I want to infuse. So in that tart, am I going to make my own crust and infuse that with canna butter? Or am I going to make a crust, not infuse it, and infuse the vegetables that go on top? And it varies.
Right.
I can do either. The thing is, if you know the potency of this strain, you know how much to put in, and you don't have to worry that you're going to get messed up.
You're going to give somebody a panic attack.
Yeah.
Send somebody to the hospital.
Oh my goodness,
right?
That happens.
Yeah, it happens. It's happening more and more and more.
Yeah. Oh, my friend Gary, he had to go to the emergency room. It was terrible because he was freaking out. He thought, and his wife, who was a doctor, thought he was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
And we're like, he's probably just, but of course, go to the hospital. He was fine.
Yeah.
But we in our company, we like to go low, and
right.
My feeling is, if you want to know what your comfortable potency is, when you know the numbers, and you can make a recipe according to the potency of your cannabis. Like if you want to make a serving be 5 milligrams, and it's 10 serving food or recipe, how much of the infused butter or oil to use.
Right.
We don't want anybody to get so messed up that, it feels awful. You're not going to die. Nobody dies of an overdose of cannabis, but it feels awful.
Yeah, it's serious business.
Yeah, and people come to me all the time and like, I don't know about edibles. In college, I ate a brownie, and a lot of people have that story. So, we have a motto: don't fear the edible. And we just say, go start low and go higher. And in the course of 4 or 5 days, if you follow the instructions, you can get to know what your potency is without ever having that bad experience. So what we'll say is, and some people can only tolerate comfortably 1 milligram of THC.
I'm like a 2.5 guy.
Yeah. So, everybody is different. A huge person may have a very high tolerance, but also may have a low tolerance.
Right.
There's kind of no way of knowing
right.
until
There's
you
no
try.
traditional, like, 2 beers does this to a 200-pound man versus a 110-pound woman. Like, that doesn't work. And
yeah. So what we say is, start. Do you have a lot of cannabis smoking experience? So at least people know what to expect or what they're probably going to feel. Yeah. But we're like, start with 2.5, and that in the evening when you have nowhere to go,
right?
You don't have to drive, you
You're
don't
not
have
on
to
the clock.
operate heavy machinery,
right?
And start low, and don't add to it that night.
Right.
If you don't feel anything, that's okay. The next night, take a little more, and you'll be able to figure out, as long as you have the potency results, what the best potency is for you. And there are people who can take 1,000 milligrams of THC, which just blows my mind. But it's just
right. To each his own.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. That I think that it's really easy to infuse, but you need to remember
because you use like butter and oils and things like that, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have a choice. There are a lot of products now that you can use to infuse your in our company. What we do is we take perfect buds, like A buds.
Yeah.
And we decarboxylate, which means we're activating the psychotropic cannabinoid THC, and we decarboxylate, so that once it's activated, then we put the buds into either butter or into coconut oil, and infuse the oil, strain out the cannabis, and that's what we use to infuse. So we are a solvent-free company. So our people who eat our edibles are going to have a considerably different experience than eating an edible that's made with a solvent, which would be BHO or PHO. And there's all kinds of things now that have gone through some sort of process that has for one, gotten rid of a lot of the terpenes and cannabinoids that we want to maintain in our products. And what's been a challenge for us as a company is we get a lot of requests to do a 50 milligram single serving.
Yeah, like one piece of chocolate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because we use oil and we're not using a perhaps tasteless infusion technique like a distillate, we have that flavor to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
So to do coconut oil and make a 50 milligram something, I just don't think it would have the quality that
Right.
we
It's not going to meet
have
your sort of what's the culinary standards.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's something we talk about because this business is changing, and we're starting to see a lot of very inexpensive 50 milligram potency products. There's cookies and
Right.
gummies, but they taste like weed, or they taste like the solvent that's in them. So
Right.
we've kind of pushed back on doing a 50. We do now, as I mentioned, I think we do cookies. They're 10 milligrams.
Yeah.
And for me, I can eat the whole cookie, but I couldn't eat 2, and I could certainly not eat 50. And most
Right, you couldn't have 5.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
God.
So that's kind of been a challenge, but I think it's part of what sets our company apart.
Yeah.
That our product's always going to be the same, and there's not going to be anything questionable in the process. I mean,
And for what it's worth, in my opinion, the sort of art you bring to it, or certainly expertise as far as the food making itself, right?
Yeah, that.
If I may say so.
Yeah, you may.
Yeah.
I want the products to be delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's our goal, and I want the taste of cannabis to be covered up, and I don't want to compete for the very lowest spot.
Right.
We're
Lowest common denominator.
Yeah, like we have a reputation for being high quality,
Right.
and a high that is going to be predictable.
Right.
And it's not going to leave a weird BHO taste on your tongue.
So, right, exactly. So the second part of my question, what advice do you have for sort of amateur, cannabis cooks who I guess, you've published all these incredible recipes over the years. I mean, is it just follow the recipe, or if people don't want to necessarily follow your recipes, but they do want to sort of experiment with cannabis cooking in more of a, elevated sense? Do you have any sort of basic tips that you could offer,
Yeah, people ask me that a lot. And again, the first thing that I would say is necessary is having those tests. So having the numbers to work with.
Right.
Making an infusion is not difficult. I do have steps on our website, a step-by-step infusion of cannabis or coconut oil.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, let me ask you, just because I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
We've talked about the idea of decarboxylation is probably pretty rudimentary to you and me, but that's basically that if you went to a dispensary and bought a bud of weed and brought it home and just put it in, put it in food, it wouldn't really do anything. You have to decarboxylate it first, which is heating it up. Most people use a lighter and,
Right,
roll it
and
into a joint or whatever.
Yeah.
But what do you bake it at? How does that, what do you bake it? You bake it, right? Or no, do I have that wrong?
We decarboxylate in the oven.
In the oven, right.
Yeah. It's
At
a
what temp?
rather smelly process.
Mm-hmm. Good smell, or like Christmas nuts, but weed, or is it
No.
what the hell is going on
A little
in here?
bit.
Okay.
When we're making
So have a good hood
oil.
vent.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't like the smell at all of the oil being made. So I think there are a few things that you need to know, keep the heat low.
Okay.
Because you want to preserve as much of the plant. So heat will destroy terpenes and cannabinoids. So obviously we have to heat because we're making baked goods.
Yep.
That we never bake above 340.
Okay.
And so I think the temperature is important. I think dosing. Oh, you had asked about homogeneity.
Yeah.
So to make everything homogeneous, you have to mix for a long time, which is a bit of an issue because some baked products, like you can overwork the flour and have a tougher.
Right.
So we have learned how to infuse, what to infuse, and then how to get it into the batters and
Right.
things.
And like when to.
Exactly. Right. But when I, talk to people or teach classes about how to infuse, I think low heat, if you've made an infusion that's really potent, it may be that a quarter of a teaspoon is all the canna butter or all the canna oil you need to infuse a batch of, 24 brownies.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the beginning when I was cooking making edibles at home or making a dinner party and serving, I look and I'm like, oh, this can't be enough.
Right.
It's like, this is too little. But it's very concentrated.
Right.
And I think that keeping the temperature low, knowing your dose, don't when we do a dinner party, we try and make it so that nobody has more than 10 milligrams in the course of a meal.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll do little add-ons for the people with the 500 milligram
tolerance.
I'll infuse croutons for the Caesar salad. So I've infused the dressing for the Caesar, but it's only, one serving is 5 milligrams. Then I'll infuse croutons, and if people have a higher tolerance, they can add it that way.
Right.
So not, kind of taking into account that everybody has a different tolerance.
It's been so fun, like going to dinner parties at your house, because there's little like cards everywhere being like, what this is, infused, not safe, or not safe, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Mary is my daughter-in-law.
Mm-hmm. And your business partner.
And my business partner. And I have to say, there is no way I could have done this without her.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a type A, I'm a type Z.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a ton of fun, but she is the person who kind of keeps me more professional. Like,
sure.
I'm kind of I'm just a little out there, and I'm not a rule person.
Chefs and, is like a form of artistry. Artists are not typically, the artists are certainly disciplined, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There's a X factor when it comes to what, the kind of work that you do, or sort of the kind of, and I kind of consider myself that way too, and it's sort of like, we don't necessarily, we're not always the best functioning in like a business environment.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm a disaster when it comes to business.
Yeah.
And everybody knows it in the kitchen. I kind of hate rules.
Yeah.
And, this industry is filled with rules.
Right.
That's some that are great and make a lot of sense, and then some that are like
arbitrary
really?
and
What?
ridiculous. Yeah.
So I just have to say, I'm sure I don't say it enough, but Mary, we hardly knew each other when we became business partners.
Mm-hmm.
But I figured if my son loved her,
right. He's a good judge of character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm more creative. I'm the one who kind of sort of the face of the brand. Yep. And Mary's like happy to not do that.
Not be the face of the brand.
Yeah. Yep. She's shy. I'm a little shy, but it's like, to her that's like a nightmare, and to me, if I had to do metric, which is the way like this business works.
Metric, for our listeners, is sort of the in-house state, system that keeps track of the cannabis. When you make, when you sell from wholesale to dispensary, sell to retail, all that stuff, like it's all in one centralized system called metric.
Yeah, and it's a very involved.
I've never learned how to use it.
Yeah, no, me either. They wouldn't let me anywhere near that.
Yeah.
It literally tracks, like when you're delivering something, you put in the time you're leaving your kitchen and the time you're getting to the first stop.
Right.
No, it's intense, and
Yeah.
it just there's no way. You know, I'm not allowed to do labeling sometimes because I'm just
Yeah.
like old and don't really care if the label's on right, but I know I should care.
Right.
So, you know, we have people who care.
Right. You're so, I mean, right. And part of being, you're part of being a good business owner, I think, at this point, at least what I've learned is like knowing what you don't know, or
Yeah.
knowing what you hate
Yeah.
and can't do, you know?
Yeah.
So, so you're doing okay, you know what I mean? Like, and nobody can do it all,
Right.
right? And like, as far as like you being sort of the face of the brand, quote unquote, it's like, you know, you've been, you know, you worked in media, right? I mean, for a long time. Like
Yeah.
you like had, you know, whether or not you're a shy person, like, you know, you're a public, you know, you've published article upon article upon article, you know, over the course, either on the back end, or you've been, you know, or whatever. So it's sort of like it's sort of almost, I'm sure, somewhat second nature to you, as much as you're, you know, as much as you may not like love it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And I mostly, it's fun. I'm like very nervous before, like, you know, just, and it's funny, when I was working at a magazine years ago, I had to do these little shows at FAO Schwartz in the morning. I was working for Child Magazine, so FAO Schwartz, like this amazing toy store.
Sure.
We had these early meetings for like moms before they went to work, and so I had to talk about food and food for your family, and it had been years since I had to do that. Like, I think the last time I had to do it was like reading a report in front of the class,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And it was pretty terrifying. I tried to think in my head that I was Katie Couric, who I don't even know if anybody knows who that is anymore. But I'm like, just like go into her and be friendly and be open. And I've gotten better at it, but I'm not comfortable. But I think that I have a passion and love for this company and for this plant.
Right.
So once I get started, it's kind of easy to talk about it.
Yeah, your passion for what you're doing sort of supersedes your sort of nerves or aversion to it. Okay, let's take a break there, and we'll come back and talk more with Laurie Wolf of Laurie and Mary Jane, and we're going to talk about the cannabis industry, the current state of it, which I think we both agree is not great.
Yeah. Okay.
You are listening to This is Cannabis on XRAY FM.